Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the podcast. As always, I'm your host Tudor, and thank you for joining me each Wednesday to explore the many facets that define the human experience. To set the stage for our topic today, let me present you a very old story, namely the story of Theseus. Now, Theseus, most famously known in the Greek mythology for traversing the labyrinth of Minos and slaying the Minotaur therein, is regarded by many as the mythical founder of Athens in a similar vein as Romulus and Remus are for Rome. The ship that Theseus used to sail back to Athens from the Cretan labyrinth was kept in the harbor of Athens as a ceremonial vessel of sorts, from whence it was only put out to sea once a year during celebrations in honor of the god Apollo. Naturally, as any wooden construction, the ship of Theseus was vulnerable to the elements, and as such various planks, sails, and other parts of the ship would degrade, rot, or become porous enough that it would put the ship at risk of sinking. As such, periodical maintenance by the harbor workers would remove these damaged components and replace them with new ones manufactured at the various woodworkers in Athens. It is centuries after the start of this tradition that the ancient Greek philosophers Heraclitus and Plato independently pondered on the fact that the ship of Theseus that they were observing in their own lifetime had nothing left on it from the original ship. Given this, would it even be accurate for it to be known under this name, or should it just be a simple wooden ship? This is what has since been known as the Ship of Theseus thought experiment. This philosophical debate on whether objects should retain their identity, even when all their original components have been replaced, has not died down to this day. Unlike many other philosophical questions, this one has a great deal of applicability, as there are countless examples, both old and new, that ponder on this dilemma in various ways. For example, a young man receives an axe from his aging father. During his time of using the axe, he replaces the handle with a new identical one, as the previous one had become old and rotten. Once he grows old, he hands the axe to his son and asks him to take great care of it, as it belonged to his grandfather after all. The son accepts this family heirloom, but being a practical being, much like his predecessors, he uses the axe in his day-to-day activities until the axe head becomes dull. At this point, he replaces the axe head with a new one, which is also purpose-built to be the same as the original in both shape and materials used. If he will have children of his own, he will also pass down the axe to his children and retain its title as the axe of the original father in the story. So just like the ship of Theseus, an object retains its identity seemingly in the eyes of its owners, even when it no longer contains any parts of the original object. But what if the grandson, when replacing the axe head, had also found the old rotten original handle of the axe? If he had put together the original axe head and this old rotten original handle, would he then in essence have two axes? The original axe, but which has been deteriorated by time, and the new axe, which resembles the original axe at its peak condition, but that has none of the original in it. When faced with this dilemma, which one has the right to be called the heirloom axe in this case? Similarly, there are several modern quandaries on this subject. Say you have a rock band composed of the typical four members that you would expect: a vocalist, a guitarist, a drummer, and a bassist. If these original members were to be suddenly replaced with four others, most people would declare that these four newcomers have no right to hold the same name, even if permission was obtained from the original quartet. Yet, these same people would not raise the same concern if the original members had left one by one over a period of time, leading to the same situation only over the span of a few years instead of overnight. But what if the four original members, once they had left the first band, decided to create their own? They would be forced to adopt a new name, as the naming rights would be retained by the record label representing the original band. Yet between the two of them, the second band comprised of the original members would be the more accurate representation. In a similar vein, successful software and apps are created constantly and used by billions around the world. Take the example of Facebook, which has been around for 17 years already. If one were to compare the original source code, the branding, and so on, from the launch of Facebook to current-day Facebook, there would be no common points except for the identity that we associate with it. Even its original scope of an easy tool to provide college students a way to connect with each other has morphed into whatever can be considered Facebook's agenda these days. Should some unknown programmer show up and launch a social network using the original source code used for Facebook, there will not be a single person willing to claim that the Facebook of today and this relaunch of the original would have any commonalities except for the name. Another example, also received from Heraclitus, the philosopher we mentioned at the start, sounds like this. No man ever steps in the same river twice, for it's not the same river and he is not the same man. Now, whilst the first part of the quote makes sense intuitively, as on any subsequent crossing a person will wade through a different body of water as the previous water is now downstream, it is perhaps the second part of the quote that holds the direst implications with regards to what we consider to be fundamental about us as human beings. All the examples so far have shown that while for identity purposes we refer to changing things by the same identity as more of a legacy rather than an implicit agreement of equivalency, we do not inherently extend this awareness to our own selves. We think we are the same person our whole lives, yet on average every cell in the human body dies and is replaced around every 7 years. By this metric alone, we should concede we change and transform in a permanent fashion, yet we cling to our identities fiercely. Most will defend themselves and say that while people may change, their uniqueness is preserved regardless of the many alterations over time through the persistence of their attributes, an aspect as coded in their unique DNA code. Then consider this, if you will. In our modern age, organ transplants have become a regular surgery performed on an as-needed basis. When a person receives a transplant, be it of a kidney, a piece of liver, or a graft of skin, we inherently do not question the identity of the receiver or confuse it with that of the donor. But what if the same transplant beneficiary would get more body parts from the donor, which tragically died but whose body is relatively unscathed? At which point could we start putting their identity into question? When their physical exterior matches that of the donor? When they have the same manners, the same tics, the same reactions? Or are we willing to look past these and judge on their mind alone? Now, if the identity of an individual truly resides in their brain, even though that also is repaired and replaced just like the rest of our body, we indeed may have hit for now the limit of how much we can alter the human body. After all, brain transplants aren't a thing yet, at least for humans. But, given the rate of technological development, we will most certainly one day hit the point where the human brain can be saved in a transferable or even copyable form. When this point is reached, we may have to contend with scenarios where a healthy brain is transferred from a damaged body to a healthy body whose brain was lost, making the question of identity murkier than ever before. Many science fiction stories have also broached this topic with regards to robots and AI, where we also have to think that if an AI was given the memory and personality of a human, and housed in a body that is an organic replica of the same human's body, can we, just like in the axe example, consider it the heirloom of the original human, guaranteed to survive across time, long after even the smallest molecules of the original person have broken down? We may never have a concrete answer to these questions, nor should we really strive to do so in all honesty. After all, the purpose of these dilemmas is not in solving them, as it is to challenge the way we view the universe and its inner workings and give us the tools to question the status quo, whatever it may be. Moving on to my weekly weight loss journey check-in. This week I lost a whopping 2.2 kilograms. I think honestly the reason for this unexpected success can be attributed to the fact I ate quite less than usual and had the opportunity to do a healthier weekend getaway where I took a more balanced approach to my daily meals. I also went on a great hike as well, which while only 15 kilometers long, did have a 900 meter ascent, so it proved challenging in its own way. I'm a bit giddy to have lost what amounts to 5 pounds, not going to lie, especially since this also marks the 25% milestone towards my ideal weight. Ideally, I should have reached this one last week, but a 1 week delay is still recoverable with 39 weeks left to go. In any case, thank you for listening to this week's episode. As always, if you want to leave feedback, you can find the email address in the episode description. There you'll also find the links to the podcast Twitter and Facebook, which you can follow to find out when the newest episode is released, as well as the podcast subreddit, where you can discuss with others your opinions on the subject. Hope you all have a lovely week, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.